He stood in the saloon doorway, tall as a pine tree, broad as the barn doors behind him, his shadow stretching across the wooden floor like something carved from the mountains themselves. "I need a wife by tomorrow," he said. The room laughed. It was not cruel laughter at first. It was the kind that bursts out when something sounds too strange to be real. Whiskey glasses paused in midair. A card game stopped. Someone near the piano slapped his knee. A man at the bar muttered that the mountains must have frozen the fellow's brain. But the man in the doorway did not smile. He stood still, hands hanging heavy at his sides, hat pulled low, coat dusted with the pale gray of high country roads. He looked like a man who had wrestled trees for most of his life and won. So the Wyoming Territory, in the fall of 1874, was not a place that cared about pride. It cared about survival. The wind cut across the plains like a blade. The winters came early and left late. The mountains watched everything and helped no one. The town of Aspen Bend sat between those mountains and the river that bent east like it had changed its mind halfway through the land. 60 families, maybe less. A general store, a livery stable, a church that served as a courthouse when the judge rode through, a schoolhouse that opened when enough children could be gathered, and the saloon where men brought their noise and their loneliness. The man in the doorway was named Josiah Cade. He was 41 years old and built by wind and labor. His shoulders were wide from years of swinging an axe. His hands were thick and scarred, and shaped more like tools than flesh. His beard was rust-colored and uneven, trimmed with a knife when it got in his way. His nose had healed crooked from an old accident. His face was not handsome. It was used. But his eyes were clear blue, gentle blue, the kind of eyes that did not match the rest of him. He had lived alone in the mountains above Aspen Bend for 16 years. He trapped. He cut timber. He hunted. He came to town twice a year to trade and then returned to the quiet. He was not unfriendly. He simply did not belong to rooms full of people. Yet here he was. "I am serious," he said, his voice low but steady. "By tomorrow morning." More laughter. A man shouted that he should try the next territory over. Another asked if the wife came with instructions. A woman near the piano said she would sooner marry the piano. Josiah did not move. He waited. The laughter began to thin, not because the jokes improved, but because something in his face refused to bend. "There are 2 children," he said. The words changed the air. "A boy and a girl. I found them 3 weeks ago on the mountain road. Their wagon stopped. Their parents inside. Fever took them." The room grew quiet, but this time it was not awkward. It was heavy. They were sitting in the dirt beside the wheel. The boy had his arm around his sister. She was holding a rag doll. He swallowed once, his jaw tight. "I brought them home. I fed them, gave them my bed. I sleep by the fire now. The judge rides in tomorrow. If I am not married, they will be sent east. Orphan train." No one laughed now. The orphan train was not a joke. So it was a word that carried distance and cold, and buildings where children were counted like sacks of grain. "A single man cannot keep them," Josiah said. "The law requires a wife." He did not beg. He did not plead. He simply stood there, a mountain man in a loud room, asking for something he had never imagined asking for. "I am not asking for love," he added. "I am asking for a woman to stand beside me before the judge, so those children do not lose their home." Silence settled like dust after a storm. Then a chair scraped the floor. From the back of the room, a woman stood. She had been sitting alone with a cup of coffee, not whiskey. Her dress was plain blue. Her dark hair was pulled back simply. She was perhaps 35. Not young. not old. Just steady. Her name was Edith Shaw, but she had come west 4 months earlier after burying her husband and her son in a town that no longer felt like air. Cholera had taken them within the same week. She left because staying meant drowning in memory. She worked at the boarding house washing linens. She spoke little. Most people in Aspen Bend barely noticed her, but she stepped forward now. The room watched. She walked toward Josiah slowly, not rushed, not uncertain. She stopped a few feet from him and looked up. He was a head taller. She had to tilt her chin to meet his eyes. "I have one question," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it did not shake. "Ask it," Josiah replied. She studied his face, not the beard, not the scars. She looked only at his eyes. "Will you be kind to them?" The words hung in the air. Not will you provide, not will you protect, not will you prosper. Will you be kind? The saloon felt smaller somehow. Josiah's breath left him slowly. His hands opened at his sides. "I have been kind to them," he said. "I fed them before I knew how to feed children. I held the girl when she cried in her sleep. I taught the boy to stack wood because he wanted to help." His voice roughened. "I do not have money. I do not have fine manners. I cut my own hair with a knife, but I will be kind. Every day." Edith watched him a long moment. Then she nodded once. "Then I will marry you," she said. The room did not laugh this time. It exhaled. They were married the next morning in the small white church that served as a courthouse when the judge rode through. Judge Whitfield stood behind a narrow wooden table with his ledger open. He had seen land disputes, cattle theft, yea, broken contracts, and men who could not stand the sight of one another. He had not seen many marriages that began with such quiet urgency. Gabriel stood on Josiah's right side, stiff and serious, in a borrowed jacket that hung too big on his narrow shoulders. Lily stood beside Edith, holding her rag doll against her chest, as if the doll were giving instructions on how to behave. Mrs. Calloway from the general store had donated a simple gold band from her own jewelry box. It was slightly worn, but it shined in the morning light that came through the church window. The ceremony was short. Frontier life did not allow for long speeches. "Do you take this man?" the judge began. "I do," Edith said before he finished. Her voice was steady. She did not look at the crowd. She looked only at Josiah. When it was his turn, Josiah's hands trembled slightly as he placed the ring on her finger. He had swung axes without shaking. He had faced mountain storms without fear. But this felt heavier than any winter. "I do," he said. The judge signed the ledger. He stamped the custody paper with firm pressure. "Custody granted," he said. "The children remain in your care." Gabriel's shoulders loosened for the first time in 3 weeks. Lily stepped closer to Edith and pressed the rag doll into her hand, as if sealing a private agreement. Outside, the town gathered. Not to mock. Not this time. They stood with hats in hand and watched the new family step into the cold October air. The wagon ride back up the mountain was quiet. Josiah drove. Edith sat beside him. Gabriel and Lily sat in the back, bundled in blankets. The road climbed slowly through pine and rock, but winding higher, where the air grew thinner and cleaner. Edith did not speak much. She watched the trees. She watched the cabin appear between them, like something built from patience and stubbornness. When they reached it, she stepped down from the wagon and stood still for a long moment. The cabin was rough. The wood was dark from weather. The roof was solid, but plain. Smoke drifted gently from the chimney. It was not beautiful. It was honest. "It needs curtains," she said. Josiah blinked. "I do not own curtains." "You do now," she replied. "I brought fabric." She had packed before the wedding. Not many things. A Bible, a photograph of her son, which she placed on the mantel without explaining, a small bundle of cloth, a sewing needle. Josiah did not ask about the photograph. Some things did not require questions. The first weeks were careful. Edith moved through the cabin quietly at first, learning where Josiah kept things, how he stacked wood, how he organized tools. She did not try to change him. She adjusted around him. Curtains appeared at the windows. Bread replaced hard biscuits. The cabin began to carry the smell of more than smoke and pine. Gabriel followed Josiah everywhere. He learned how to split wood properly, how to track deer prints in fresh snow, how to carry water without spilling. The boy did not laugh much, but he listened closely. Lily stayed close to Edith. She watched her sew. She touched the fabric. She pressed the rag doll into Edith's lap at night before bed. 3 weeks after the wedding, Lily spoke her first word. She was sitting beside Edith on the floor while Edith stitched a patch onto Josiah's coat. The fire cracked softly. Snow tapped against the window. Lily looked up at her. "Mama," she said. The word was small, but it filled the cabin. Edith's hands froze. The needle dropped quietly to the floor. For a moment, she did not breathe. She had buried her son with her own hands. She had whispered goodbye into cold air. She had believed that word was gone from her life forever. Now it stood in the room again, fragile and alive. She gathered Lily into her arms and held her tightly. Not desperate, not broken, just steady. Josiah stood in the doorway watching. He had meant to tell Edith that the firewood was stacked. Instead, he stood there and understood something deeper than law or paperwork. Kindness had turned strangers into something else. Spring came slow in the mountains. The snow melted into streams that ran loud and clear. Gabriel grew taller. His dark eyes softened. One afternoon, while stacking wood beside Josiah, he spoke without thinking. "Papa, where should this go?" The word landed between them like something placed carefully on a shelf. Josiah looked at him. He felt something press against his chest, so strong he could not speak properly. "Against the west wall," he answered quietly. He turned back to the wood so the boy would not see the shine in his eyes. Years began to move faster after that. The cabin grew. Josiah added another room with his own hands. Edith planted a garden that seemed too stubborn to fail. Lily's voice filled every corner of the house. Gabriel learned the mountains as if they were a second language. The town of Aspen Bend remembered that evening in the saloon, but they remembered the laughter most of all, because without the laughter, there would have been no silence. Without the silence, there would have been no question. And without the question, there would have been no family riding up a mountain road under a pale Wyoming sky. Every evening before bed, Edith asked the same thing. "Were you kind today?" Josiah always answered the same way. "I tried." And she would smile, because trying was everything. Wait, before we move on, what do you think about the story so far? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to know. Winter returned the way it always did in the Wyoming high country. Slow at first, then all at once. The wind pressed against the cabin walls like it was testing them. Snow covered the roof in thick white layers. The mountains disappeared behind gray skies, and the world narrowed down to firelight and breath and the sound of boots on wooden floors. By then, the family inside the cabin no longer felt new. It felt rooted. Gabriel was nearly 15. He had grown into his shoulders. His hands had hardened from work. He moved through the mountains with quiet confidence, the same way Josiah did. He still spoke less than other boys in town, but when he did speak, his words carried weight. Lily was 13 and impossible to silence. She filled the cabin with stories, questions, and laughter. Her rag doll still sat on her bed, though she no longer carried it everywhere. She pretended she had outgrown it. She had not. Edith's hair carried more silver now, not from age alone, but from years lived fully. She still wore simple dresses. She still kept the cabin orderly. Yet she still asked the same question each night before bed, and Josiah still answered the same way. One February afternoon, a rider came hard up the mountain road. Gabriel saw him first. "Someone's coming fast," he called from the yard. Josiah stepped outside. The rider was young, maybe 20, his horse lathered and breathing hard. Snow clung to his coat. He was from Aspen Bend. "They're taking him," the young man said, struggling for breath. "Sheriff says Gabriel struck one of the Miller boys in town, broke his jaw. Sheriff's bringing men." Gabriel stood still. Josiah turned slowly toward him. "Is it true?" he asked. Gabriel did not look away. "He pushed Lily," the boy said. "Called her things. I told him to stop. He did not stop." Lily stood in the doorway now, pale but steady. "He tried to pull me," she said quietly. "Gabriel pulled him off." The wind blew sharp between them. Josiah did not shout. He did not rush. He simply nodded once. "You go inside," he told Lily. "Stay with your mama." Hoofbeats echoed up the mountain soon after. The sheriff arrived with 2 men behind him. Their faces were stiff with authority and cold. "Gabriel Cade," the sheriff called out. "You're coming with us." Josiah stepped forward. "He defended his sister," he said calmly. "He broke a boy's jaw. He protected his family." The sheriff looked from Josiah to Gabriel. The tension in the yard felt heavy as snow before collapse. "He'll stand trial in town," the sheriff said. "Let the judge decide." Gabriel stepped forward before Josiah could speak again. "I'll go," he said. His voice was not afraid. Edith came out then, placing her hand gently on Gabriel's shoulder. Her eyes met Josiah's. There was fear there, but it was steady fear, not panic. "We will go with him," she said. The ride down to Aspen Bend felt longer than it had years ago when Josiah rode in alone asking for a wife. This time he rode with a son between him and the law. The town gathered again, just like that night in the saloon. Only now, they did not laugh. They remembered. Judge Whitfield, older now, took his place behind the same narrow table. He listened to both sides. He heard about the fight. He heard about the insult. He heard about Lily. Then he looked at Gabriel. "Did you strike him?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Gabriel answered. "Why?" "Because he would not stop." The judge leaned back. He studied Josiah. He studied Edith. He studied Lily, standing quietly behind them. But then he asked the question that echoed like a memory. "Were you kind?" he asked Gabriel. The room shifted. Gabriel swallowed once. "I tried to be," he said. "I asked him to stop. Twice." The judge looked at the sheriff. "Case dismissed," he said. "A brother protecting his sister is not a crime in this territory." A low murmur moved through the room. Not anger, not laughter. Approval. Outside the courthouse, the same townspeople who once laughed now nodded at Josiah as he passed. Some even tipped their hats. The ride back up the mountain felt lighter. Gabriel rode taller. Lily held her head high. Edith rested her hand on Josiah's arm for a moment, just long enough. That evening, as the fire burned low, Edith asked her usual question. "Were you kind today?" Josiah looked at Gabriel before answering. "I tried," he said, and Gabriel echoed him softly. "I tried." Edith smiled, because that was still enough. Years later, when Josiah's beard had turned mostly white, and Gabriel had built a cabin of his own further down the ridge, the town of Aspen Bend still told the story. They told it about the mountain man who walked into a saloon and asked for a wife. They told it about the laughter. But most of all, they told it about the question. Not the one asked in court, not the one shouted in anger. The first one. Will you be kind? Because in a land that stripped men down to bone and weathered wood, kindness was the rarest thing of all. And in a small cabin high above Aspen Bend, it had built something stronger than law, stronger than winter, stronger even than the mountains. It had built a family.